Growing up, I was told, just focus on school. We've got your college money covered. Turned out, there was no we. At 24, I discovered my savings had funded my brother's tropical ceremony and honeymoon suite. During his messy split, I posted a photo of the resort invoice in the family group chat and wrote, "Guess I was the real wedding gift." The moment after I sent it felt like stepping off a ledge I didn't know I'd climbed. I remember staring at the screen while my pulse thudded in my throat, a heavy, uneven rhythm that made it hard to breathe. The tiny icons beside my family's names flickered as they typed, erased, typed again, like they were all scrambling to assemble the version of themselves they wanted me to see. Nothing came through at first, just the soft mechanical hum of my fan and the dull glow of the phone lighting up my desk. When the messages finally arrived, they hit all at once, a cascade of gray bubbles stacking on top of the screenshot I had dropped in. Their words were predictable, but the timing, the sudden shift from silence to accusation, made the whole thing feel unreal. I didn't open the messages right away. I watched them appear one by one until they stopped, and then everything went still again. No more typing, no more sudden bubbles. Just the invoice sitting there like a piece of evidence that had always existed, but only now had been placed under a light bright enough that none of them could ignore it. For a moment, I didn't move. My hands rested flat on the desk, my fingers stiff, like if I lifted them too quickly the entire room would tilt. The air felt different, thicker somehow, as if the apartment itself understood I had crossed a line that I couldn't step back from. I flipped my phone face down and tried to steady myself, but it didn't work. My mind kept drifting back to the screenshot, to the neat little corner where my name was printed as the account holder, to the bold resort logo that seemed more mocking the longer I stared at it. I got up from the desk because staying seated made me feel trapped. I walked slowly to the kitchen, trying to shake off the tight feeling in my chest. The apartment was dim, only the hallway lights spilling across the floor. I hadn't realized how late it was until I caught my reflection in the microwave door, tired eyes, tense jaw, like someone bracing for impact. I ran some water into a glass, held it but didn't drink it. My hands were still shaking. My phone buzzed again from the other room, the sound sharp enough to make me flinch. A call this time, then another, then the soft vibration that meant someone had left a voicemail. I didn't go back for it. I stayed leaning against the kitchen counter, breathing slowly, trying to understand why even now, after everything I'd learned, I still felt guilty for telling the truth. Eventually, I walked to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch. The cushion sank slightly under my weight, familiar and worn. I had seen this couch through nights of studying, nights of exhaustion, nights when I convinced myself that all my work would be worth it because I had a safety net waiting for me. Now that net was gone, and the only thing left was the weight of a reality I had tried to avoid. The people who were supposed to look out for me had made decisions about my life without ever thinking they owed me an explanation. I stayed like that for a long time, staring at nothing, letting the quiet wrap around me. I tried to think about what exactly had pushed me to hit send. It wasn't anger, not really. It was something slower, heavier, like a pressure that had been building for years. Growing up, I'd always been told to trust them, to keep my head down and work hard because my future was secure. And I believed it. I built my entire sense of stability on their promises. Every late night, every shift I picked up, every exam I crammed for, I held on to the idea that it was leading to something better because the foundation had already been laid for me. Finding out what they had done cracked that foundation in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that they had made plans with it behind my back and then lied by omission every time they told me to focus on school, every time they said I was taken care of. By the time I discovered the truth, the damage was done. The fund wasn't a fund anymore. It was a receipt from a resort I had never seen and a debt I never chose. After a while, I picked up the phone again, but I didn't check the messages. I sat on the coffee table and just looked at it, feeling the small ripple of vibrations move through the wood every time another notification came in. The sound became background noise, like distant construction or passing cars, persistent but ignorable. What struck me most that night wasn't their outrage. It was how predictable it all felt. I knew exactly which accusations would come, which excuses they would lean on, which angles they would use to shift the blame. It was almost mechanical. What I hadn't anticipated was the quiet that followed. Not the silence in my apartment, but the one on their end. The sudden lack of certainty, the hesitation in their messages, the way the typing bubbles kept starting and stopping. They weren't angry because I was wrong. They were angry because I was right. I spent the rest of the night awake, not moving from the couch. The hours passed slowly. The sounds of the building changed as neighbors closed doors, turned off lights, settled into sleep. Outside, occasional cars rolled by, headlights slipping across the ceiling before fading. My phone finally went silent around 2 in the morning, but I didn't pick it up. I didn't want to see who had given up first. Around sunrise, pale light crept through the blinds, outlining the dust on the coffee table and the faint scratches on the hardwood floor. The world looked the same, but something in me felt shifted, like a door had been opened and could never be closed again. I stood up, stretched stiff limbs, and walked to the window. The street below looked ordinary. A few early risers walking dogs, a delivery truck rumbling past, someone jogging with headphones on. Life continued, indifferent to whatever was happening in my tiny apartment. I realized then that everything after that message would be different. Not dramatic at first, not explosive, just different in the slow, accumulating way that small fractures grow into something that can't be repaired. I knew I would have to deal with the fallout, face whatever came next, listen to whatever explanations or demands they would try to throw at me. But standing there in the muted morning light, I also understood that nothing they said would undo what I felt in that moment. A strange mix of grief, clarity, and a quiet sense of relief. Relief that the truth was finally out, even if it cost me the version of my family I'd spent years trying to believe in. I didn't know yet what the next days would look like, or how deep the damage went. But I knew the message I sent had cracked open something that had been festering for years, something none of us could pretend away anymore. And as I finally walked toward the bathroom to wash my face, the phone still untouched on the table, I understood one more thing, maybe the most unsettling of all. The fallout hadn't even begun yet. The next morning started before I was ready for it. I hadn't slept much. My body felt heavy, like I'd been carrying something through the night instead of resting. The apartment was cold when I finally got out of bed, the kind of chill that made every movement slow. I knew my phone would be waiting for me, lit up with missed calls and messages, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it yet. For a few minutes, I just sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the floor, trying to steady the tightness in my chest before the day really began. Eventually, I picked up the phone, and the screen lit up with exactly what I expected. Notifications stacked on top of each other, long messages previewed in thin gray lines, several missed calls, and one voicemail icon that seemed almost accusatory. I didn't open anything. I just watched the list scroll longer as more messages arrived. It was obvious that none of them had slept either. When I finally answered a call, it happened almost by accident. My thumb slipped while I was trying to silence the phone, and suddenly the line connected. I heard breathing first, quick, uneven, the kind that comes from pacing or crying or both. Even without words, I could already feel the blame forming on the other end, heavy and unspoken, like a weight pressing through the speaker. The tone wasn't shocked or confused. It was wounded and sharp, the kind people use when they think they've been wronged, but don't want to admit what actually caused the situation. There was no greeting, no moment to settle into the call. It started immediately with the kind of emotional pressure meant to force me into apologizing before I even understood what I was supposed to be sorry for. I listened without responding, letting the noise wash over me while my stomach tightened. The frustration coming through the phone didn't seem to be about the truth itself, but about the fact that I had shown it to them in a place they couldn't escape from. I could almost picture the moment they opened the group chat, saw the invoice, and realized it wasn't just a private issue anymore. That was the part that seemed to sting them the most. Not the act, but the exposure. When the voice on the other end finally paused, my apartment felt too quiet. I could hear my own breathing again, slightly shaky but steadier than I expected. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I just explained what I had already known for days, that the money I'd been told was mine had gone somewhere else years ago, that I had proof that I hadn't misunderstood anything. I kept it simple, calm, almost detached because I didn't trust my voice to hold if I let it fill with too much emotion. There was another long silence after that. I could hear a faint shuffle, maybe the phone being handed over, maybe someone stepping into the room to listen. The next voice was deeper, slower, heavier, carrying the weight of rehearsed justification. Every part of it sounded like someone who had already decided they were right and was now trying to convince me of the same thing. I didn't interrupt. I let the explanations arrive one by one, all dressed as reasons, but feeling more like excuses, claims about difficult circumstances, promises that something else had been planned, vague statements about timing and sacrifice. The explanations didn't match the facts. They didn't even match each other. They drifted in circles, trying to land somewhere safe, but never quite finding a place that made sense. None of it included regret. None of it included an offer to repair the damage. It all came from a place of wanting me to agree that their choices had been unavoidable, that the problem wasn't what they had done but how I had reacted. At one point, I held the phone slightly away from my ear because the mix of defensiveness and frustration was starting to echo in my head. I realized then that they weren't calling to talk to me. They were calling to manage me, to contain the situation before it grew into something they couldn't control. I felt my jaw tighten as I listened, my mind drifting back to the countless times I'd been told to trust them, to focus on school, to let them handle the things that mattered. That version of the past didn't fit anymore. It felt like remembering a place that had already been demolished. While the call continued, another message buzzed through from my brother. I didn't open it, but the preview showed enough. Short sentences, sharp tone, no accountability, no acknowledgement, just irritation, like he was inconvenienced by the fact that I cared about the money that had been mine. The message felt so casual, so dismissive, that it almost made my hands tremble again. I thought about the years I had spent working late shifts, the weekends I had given up, the scholarships I chased because I believed I didn't have to worry about the core expenses. I remembered the relief I used to feel whenever I thought about that fund, how it kept me steady, how it kept me hopeful. And realizing that all of that had been an illusion created a strange, hollow ache that spread through my chest as I listened to them talk. The call eventually circled into a familiar pattern, soft emotional appeals mixed with subtle pressure, the kind that made it clear they wanted this conversation to end with me, saying it was all fine. I didn't give them that. I stayed quiet until their words ran out. When the silence finally stretched long enough that I knew they were waiting for something, I explained the truth again, this time even more plainly. I didn't try to soften it. I didn't try to sound forgiving. I spoke like someone stating a fact that couldn't be negotiated. On the other end, the reaction shifted from defensive to exhausted, the way people sound when they've hit a wall they didn't expect to find. I heard a long exhale, then a strained voice saying something I'd heard 100 times growing up, that family's job was to stick together, that doing things for each other shouldn't be treated like debts or transactions. It was said gently, but it wasn't meant to comfort me. It was meant to pull me back into line. The call ended not with a resolution, but with a quiet, strained pause and the soft click of disconnection. I stared at the phone for a long time afterward, the screen dimming until it went dark. The apartment felt heavier than it had earlier in the morning, like the conversation had pressed itself into the walls. I knew nothing had been fixed. Nothing had been acknowledged. Nothing had been returned. All that had happened was that the truth had been spoken aloud, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one who felt uncertain. I placed the phone face down again and let the room settle around me, aware that whatever came next would be colder, messier, and far more revealing than anything that had happened so far. In the days that followed, something shifted in the way I moved through my own memories. It wasn't intentional. It just happened, like someone had quietly pulled a thread loose, and everything I thought I understood about my childhood started to sag and warp in places I hadn't looked at in years. I found myself replaying old moments without meaning to, small scenes, tiny comments, routines I used to take for granted. Now they felt different, like I had been remembering them under the wrong lighting this whole time. I kept thinking about those afternoons at the kitchen table, The ones where I sat surrounded by test prep books while the house hummed with the usual noises. I used to take comfort in those moments, believing they represented a family preparing for my future. But now, even those memories carried a faint static, a sense that something had been off the whole time. The encouragement I once thought of as support began to sound more like distraction. Every reminder to focus on school felt like a gentle hand turning my head away from something I wasn't supposed to notice. It was unsettling to realize how easily I had accepted everything at face value. I had trusted their words so completely that I never questioned them. I never examined the accounts, never asked for details, never wondered why no one ever showed me numbers or statements. That blind faith felt embarrassing now, but it also felt like evidence of how thoroughly I had been conditioned to believe that they were taking care of things. I had been told over and over that the adults knew what they were doing, that I didn't need to worry, that my only job was to excel. Once the truth came out, that whole structure collapsed in on itself. I couldn't stop thinking about the timeline I'd uncovered when I finally accessed my account. The deposits were familiar: birthday money, small amounts saved over time, occasional contributions I'd been told were being set aside for later. Then the abrupt shift years down the line, a cluster of withdrawals, large enough to make my throat tighten just reading the numbers. Each transaction felt like a blow I hadn't felt at the time, taken quietly while I went about my days unaware. Seeing those dates lined up had been like watching my own history being rewritten in real time. I recognized the time period instantly. It matched the months when I remembered my family acting strangely protective of my brother, speaking in hushed tones about how stressed he was, how overwhelmed he felt planning for the next stage of his life. None of them had looked stressed, though. They had looked excited, proud, busy with preparations I wasn't involved in. I never imagined that the reason I wasn't involved was because they were using money tied to my name, hidden in accounts I never checked because I trusted them not to touch it without telling me. What made everything worse was how ordinary it had seemed at the time. I remembered walking into the living room during the months leading up to his wedding and seeing them hunched over papers on a coffee table, talking in low voices, shuffling receipts and brochures. They always stopped when I came in, telling me they were handling something simple or nothing important. I used to shrug it off and go back to studying, believing I didn't need to know the details. Now those memories tasted sour, like evidence that the truth had been in plain sight, but disguised as normal family planning. I thought back to the ceremony itself, how they had all talked about it afterward. They showed photos from the beach, clear skies, bright water, everything glowing with the kind of curated perfection you only get from expensive locations. They had gone on and on about the resort, the views, the food, the special touches that made it unforgettable. I remembered sitting there, smiling politely, never imagining that the reason they had been able to enjoy all of that was because they had quietly drained the fund I had been relying on. Looking at those memories now made my stomach twist. It was strange realizing that the entire event, the traveling, the decorations, the lavish little details, had been built on money I didn't even know I had lost. It was like watching a movie you've seen a dozen times, only now someone is pointing out everything happening in the background that changes the meaning of the whole story. I also found myself reassessing the years before the wedding. Little things began to stand out more clearly. The way my mother used to praise me for being so mature, calling me independent, responsible, low maintenance. At the time, it felt like a compliment. Now it felt more like a justification, something she had said to herself long enough that she eventually believed I didn't need the same kind of support. My brother had always been the one who needed saving. I had always been the one who would figure it out. That pattern became clearer the more I thought about it. He had been bailed out so many times, small emergencies, impulsive decisions, financial mistakes. I had never complained when they helped him. I assumed they balanced things fairly behind the scenes, that my college fund was secure because they had promised it was. I never imagined that their version of fairness was based on the idea that I could handle less. As the days passed, I noticed that old memories kept resurfacing at random moments. I'd be washing dishes or sitting at my desk, and suddenly I'd remember a conversation from years ago that I hadn't thought about since it happened. A comment about how money comes and goes. A tense look exchanged between my parents when the topic of college expenses came up. A moment where my brother brushed off responsibility for something, and they let him because they always let him. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. It became clear that the lie hadn't started when the money was taken. The lie had started long before that, woven into the small reassurances they gave me, the gentle reminders to trust them, the repeated insistence that everything was set and secure. The betrayal wasn't just one act. It was a system they had maintained for years, a story they told me so consistently that I never thought to question it. What disturbed me most was realizing that I had accepted their version of events because it made me feel safe. It was easier to believe that everything was under control than to confront the possibility that they were making choices that didn't include my well-being. Now that I knew the truth, the safety was gone. Every memory felt different. Every promise felt hollow. Every moment of trust one had given them felt like something fragile I had handed over too easily. The unraveling wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, quiet, and incredibly painful, the kind of realization that settles deep and doesn't let go. I found myself moving through my days with a strange awareness, like I was walking through a familiar house in the dark, discovering that the furniture wasn't where I remembered it being. Nothing felt stable anymore. Not the past, not the relationships, not the assumptions I had built my future around. And through all of it, one thought kept repeating itself, uninvited but impossible to shake. If the foundation of my past had been built on a lie, then everything on top of it had cracks I hadn't seen before. I didn't expect the silence afterward to feel worse than the shouting. At least shouting had shape and volume. Silence just settled over everything like ash. For the next 2 days, the group chat stayed frozen, stuck on my last message and the image of that resort invoice. No one left, no one typed, no one even reacted. It felt like standing in an abandoned room where everyone had slipped out the back door without closing it. I kept checking my phone anyway. Not because I wanted an apology, those have been missing for years, but because I needed some sign that what I'd done actually existed outside my head. It's strange how quickly a person can doubt their own memory, even when they have a photo right in front of them. I kept zooming in on the hotel logo, tapping the dates, rereading the line with the total. It didn't make anything better, but it anchored me when everything else felt slippery. The only real sound those days came from my apartment. The fridge humming unevenly, the upstairs neighbor dragging furniture at odd hours, a dog barking somewhere outside like it was warning someone who wasn't listening. I tried working, cleaning, anything. I lasted maybe 4 minutes each time before drifting back to my phone. On the third morning, something new appeared, a typing bubble from my mother. It flickered on and off like a heartbeat struggling to start, then vanished without producing a message. A minute later, another bubble. Gone again. It repeated 3 or 4 times until I realized she wasn't writing anything. She was opening the chat, staring at what I'd posted, backing out, then repeating the whole cycle. For reasons I can't explain, that rattled me more than if she had sent a paragraph of accusations. It meant she was stuck on it, replaying the scene, circling it like a skittish animal unsure if the thing in front of her was dangerous. By late afternoon, my brother finally broke the standoff. Not with a message, but by leaving the group chat entirely. The notification was simple, unemotional, the same as if he'd changed his profile picture or updated his status. But the effect was immediate. I felt a physical drop in my stomach, a hollow slide that left a cold ache behind. Not even embarrassment, just a kind of heaviness I couldn't swallow. After that, my mother and father also went silent, though they stayed in the chat. Hours passed. Then a full day. Still nothing. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and waited for anger to return, something sharp enough to cut through the numbness. Instead, all I felt was an uneasy awareness that the ground beneath our family had shifted in a way that didn't have a path back. Not broken, exactly, more like something had been unmasked, and now everyone was scrambling to pretend they didn't see what was standing in the room with us. When I finally drifted off, I had the unsettling sense that the worst part wasn't what I'd already seen, but whatever was coming next. The next morning, I woke with that sick, weightless feeling that comes from remembering something bad before you even remember who you are. My eyes opened, and the first thing I pictured wasn't the invoice or the group chat, or even my brother leaving. It was my mother's erratic typing bubble, blinking and disappearing like a warning light she didn't know how to turn off. I checked my phone immediately. Nothing new. The group chat sat there like a sealed room with stale air inside it. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, opening cabinets without needing anything, checking the same emails in loops. The silence from my family wasn't just quiet. It was accusatory, loud in its own way, like they were all waiting for me to message first, to clean up a mess they had created but somehow decided was mine to manage. Around noon, I went for a walk just to get out of my head. It didn't help. Every sound felt sharper than usual. The hiss of a bus's brakes, the clack of someone's shoes behind me, the faint metallic ringing of a construction site several blocks away. It all made my nerves jangle like loose wires. I realized I wasn't actually walking to clear my mind. I was walking to avoid being alone with the anticipation. Because there was anticipation, an instinctive, animal-level feeling that something was on its way. When I got back home, there was a missed call from my father, no voicemail. He never called without leaving one. He was the type who hated loose ends, messages, receipts, half-finished chores. Seeing no voicemail felt wrong, like he'd dialed impulsively, then abandoned the call as soon as it connected to the automated greeting. 2 minutes later, a private text from him appeared. Not in a family chat, directly to me. Just one line. Short, blunt, emotionless. The kind of sentence someone writes while arguing with themselves. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't even a denial. It was a request. Not a violent one. Not a dramatic one. But something strangely colder. He told me he needed to come over and talk face to face. My stomach knotted. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. There was something unsettling in the phrasing. Detached, too polite, too formal. Like he was drafting an email to a coworker he barely knew. Like he was preparing for a conversation he wished he could outsource to someone else. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know if I wanted to see him, or hear whatever justification he had been rehearsing for the last 3 days. I didn't know if I wanted to see the expression he decided to put on, the mask he'd were to make the whole thing feel like a misunderstanding instead of a betrayal that had spanned years. As I was typing and deleting possible responses, a new message popped up, this time from my mother, also private, and her tone was nothing like his. Hers was frantic, hurried, words running into each other, not directly accusatory, but filled with that familiar undercurrent, the suggestion that I had caused something by forcing the truth into daylight. Not that they had lied, not that they had used me, but that I had stirred things up in a way that had upset everyone. She ended her message by saying she needed me to help calm things down. She didn't say what things. She didn't say who was upset. She didn't say why she couldn't calm anything down herself. I could hear her voice in my head anyway. Strained, fragile, on the verge of tears, but holding them back just enough to make sure blame could still pass through. I didn't answer her, either. That evening, the group chat finally showed activity. My father had changed the group name. Not to something sentimental or angry or symbolic. He simply renamed it to family. Just that, family. A plain, sterile word that suddenly felt like it was trying a little too hard. No message accompanied the change. No explanation. Just a silent revision, as if the right label might glue everything back together, or at least cover the crack running straight through the center. I sat on my couch in the dark, phone breathing soft light onto my hands, and I realized something unnerving. I wasn't worried about facing whatever they would say. I was worried about how much they weren't saying. The vacancy in their responses, the quiet spaces between the lines, the abandoned voicemail, the renamed chat. Those are the things that felt dangerous. Like the air pressure dropping before a storm you can't see yet. I told myself I'd respond in the morning. But all night, I kept my phone within arm's reach, screen up, waiting for the vibration I knew was coming. Because when a family finally stops pretending, they don't stay silent for long. Something always breaks next. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, some small sound, water pipes, a car door on the street, the elevator groaning 2 floors below, snapped me awake again. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the instinct you get the night before a medical result, when your brain convinces you something irreversible is already in motion. By morning, the sky had that dull, overcast look that makes everything feel flat and airless. I made coffee without tasting it and sat at my kitchen table staring at the phone I'd turned face down, like it was a trap I didn't want to trigger. When I finally picked it up, there were no new messages. Not from my father, not from my mother, not from the newly renamed family group. But the absence itself felt intentional now, like they'd all agreed to wait me out. Around 10, I forced myself to get ready and step outside, mostly because the stillness in my apartment was becoming unbearable. I walked to a grocery store I didn't need anything from and wandered the aisles without picking up a single item. Every time my phone buzzed in my pocket, even if it was just a promotional email, I flinched. On the way home, I saw a voicemail notification I'd somehow missed earlier. It wasn't recent. It had been left late the night before. From my mother. I stared at the notification for a long time without pressing play. Something about the timestamp made my skin tighten. I couldn't explain why. Eventually, I listened. It wasn't the kind of voicemail she usually left, the ones where she tried too hard to sound cheerful while slipping guilt between sentences. This one started with breath, just breath, shaky and uneven, and then a long, wet exhale like she'd been crying before she hit record. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't mention the invoice or the chat or my brother. Instead, she said she hoped I could understand what he's going through. She didn't clarify who he was. My father? My brother? Someone else entirely? Then she said something that made me pause the message and replay it twice. She said my father was not handling this well. She repeated the phrase, slower the second time, like she was choosing each word with exaggerated care. Not angry, not upset, not handling this well. I'd heard her use that exact tone before, when talking about distant relatives we barely saw, the ones who drank too much or shut down or disappeared for weeks at a time. The ones who had episodes. The ones she tiptoed around in conversation, as if their instability might seep through the phone lines. When the voicemail ended, I sat there with the phone pressed to my shoulder and tried to make sense of it. Was she warning me? Manipulating me? Rehearsing a justification? I didn't delete it. I didn't save it. I just let the screen go dark. Around 1 in the afternoon, the family group finally stirred. A single notification. My father. He didn't write a full message, just a short announcement that he would be stopping by today. No time given. No question mark. No request. A statement. I felt my pulse jump hard in my throat. I typed a quick reply, saying I wasn't home. I deleted it. I typed another saying I'd rather meet in a public place. Deleted that too. Every version sounded confrontational, defensive, or somehow guilty. In the end, I didn't send anything at all. 30 minutes later, a new message appeared. It wasn't in the group chat. It wasn't from either of my parents. It was from my brother, the one who had left the chat entirely. His first contact since everything blew up. Just a short fragment, sent at 1:42 p.m., with no punctuation and no context. He told me not to let our father into my apartment. There was no explanation, no follow-up, no apology. Just that single instruction sitting on my screen like a warning carved into a tree trunk. And immediately afterward, almost perfectly timed, the apartment buzzer rang. Not frantic, not impatient, just a single press, confident and steady like the person on the other side already knew I was inside and already knew I'd come to the door. I didn't move at first. I just stood in the middle of my living room, listening to the faint electrical hum of the intercom, my brother's message still bright on my phone screen. Then the buzzer rang again, longer this time. Just as steady, just as sure. The third buzz didn't come. Instead, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow, measured, stopping directly on the other side of the thin slab of what's separating me for whatever conversation my family had decided needed to happen next. No knocking, no calling my name, just the sound of someone standing there, waiting like they had all the time in the world. And that was somehow worse than anything they could have said. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and lets us bring you more and better stories.